This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So the latest in the response to this weekend's violence presser with Eddie Johnson and Tiny Dancer, which they announced more boots on the ground will be deployed to the south and west sides in the coming days and weeks ahead. Eddie Johnson doing his duty, offering this pro forma.
CPD will continue to use every tool at our disposal to combat violence and hold repeat offenders accountable for their actions.
And so here are the manpower distributions.
In the most violent South and West Side neighborhoods, CPD on weekdays adding 430 officers and 600 on weekends. Officers working extended shifts and days off canceled for tactical anti-gang and fugitive apprehension teams.
That's ABC News reporting. So there you go. Deploying more cops to the south and west sides. That satisfy your concern. 312-642-5600, turnkey.pro answer line. 64636DA, turnkey.pro text line.
Yeah, days off, canceled. Can you imagine if your boss comes in and says, hey, Dan, you're going to work for the foreseeable future until we can get this under control. You're going to work every weekend and no days off. Even like plans, vacations scheduled have to be canceled. I know one police officer whose daughter's getting married. That's not going to go well. I think he might be calling in sick. I mean, what else can you do? It's just not the way to solve this problem, I don't think. And I don't think it's fair to the troops on the ground because they need a break from all this carnage that they're seeing, from what they're involved in. They need to, I just think, if they're going to do this, then Mayor Emanuel should be working on the weekends. He shouldn't have 2 days off during a week, nor should Superintendent Johnson, if they're going to implement this. I just don't think it's fair. Hire more police officers, but the ones that are dedicated and that come to work and put their lives on the line every day, they need to have a day off.
Well, perhaps hire more police officers, but those take a while to come online, so you have to make do with the 12,000 or so that you have at present, and more presence in the west and south side seems appropriate. Although this statement that was made by Eddie Johnson is recounted by Eric Hong over at ABC 7. Strains the bounds of credulity.
Superintendent Johnson said the increase in officers on the south and west sides will continue as long as necessary, and he said it won't come at the expense of policing in other parts of the city.
Well, how does that work? If there are not more police officers and you're deploying more police officers to the south and west sides, I mean, then
where these people magically appearing?
I don't really understand that statement, but I don't understand a lot of what emanates from City Hall. A Tiny Dancer weighed in. He offered this.
Oh.
Don't forget about
what?
We need
with little tiny houses.
We need more investment, spiritual investment.
While there have been a lack of investments in parts of our city over decades, and it has consequences, there is sometimes also a spiritual deficit. I know what the podium can do, but I've also seen the power of what the pulpit can do.
The mayor's call for spiritual investment came hours after a call for monetary investment. Two groups of pastors asking the city to pour $50 million into creating an office of gun violence prevention.
Yeah, so we have spiritual investment, whatever exactly that means. I guess that means leadership from clergy in the community. Okay. And then we have clergy in the community wanting to repurpose the money that's been allocated to a Chicago Police Academy that is planned for the city's west side into repurpose that money into an office of gun violence prevention, because an expanded city bureaucracy is really what is required to quell the violence in the city. Government bureaucracies, there's where the solutions lie.
Right.
Yeah. Frank in St. Charles, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Good morning. Morning. Yeah, I can understand completely why the people that live in those areas would be complaining. They want more police protection. But I have a feeling that when there's a deadly police shooting where the police shoot and kill somebody, they're the same people that are saying he didn't have a gun, he was murdered. Could these be the same crowd, maybe?
Yeah, I would like to see the Venn diagram on that. Thanks for the call, Frank. I take your point. And then there's this that really hasn't been discussed much over the last 3 days, as everybody has been wringing their hands over the violence this weekend. Yale University study, 6-year Yale University study. Blacks are 128 times more likely than whites to get shot in Chicago.
Wow.
I'd like to see the numbers on how much more likely they are to be the shooter, too. I mean, this is black-on-black crime, which is interesting because Black Lives Matter has a seat at the table in all this consent decree negotiations.
They have a voice.
So why haven't they used their voice? Where is Black Lives Matter in this conversation? Where are they responding to the dozen people murdered and 6 dozen people shot over the weekend? What's their solution? I'd like to hear it. Black Lives Matter. APB for Black Lives Matter. Let's get their input. We want their input on the consent decree, how we're going to police the city. How about on solving the gang violence and the violence problem generally in the city? Why so quiet? I wonder why that is. Also, this University of Illinois study finds for young men of color, ages 20 to 24 in Chicago, 47% of blacks and 20% of Hispanics are neither employed nor in school.
Wow.
Half of 20 to 24-year-old black people in Chicago, black men, young black men in Chicago, the cohort that is responsible for most of the crimes, also the cohort in which most of the victims of of crimes, these violent crimes, reside, certainly the shootings and the murders. And that's just the data. You can slice it up however you want. That's the data. Half of young black men in Chicago, ages 20 to 24, not in school or employed. And 1 in 5 Hispanics, neither in school or employed. Hispanic men, 20 to 24. What do you think that produces? What do we do about that? What do we have to say about that with respect to family structure, with respect to K through 12 education? Another city-sponsored summer jobs program going to address that, is it? What about CPS? More money for CPS going to address that? Sweeten the pension for the teachers? Is that what's going to address that? Half of 20 to 24-year-old black and Hispanic black men not employed or in school. 1 in 5 Hispanic men, 2024, not employed, not in school. And it'd be interesting to do even a deeper dive to do a skill sets test. They're 20 to 24, so ostensibly they're out of high school. How many graduated? And let's see what kind of skills they came out of CPS schools with. Wouldn't that be interesting? And so perhaps maybe these individuals who are disproportionately marginalized in terms of their ability to succeed in civil society leads them down the primrose path of violence. Does anybody want to have that conversation? Black Lives Matter, the political ruling class. I would think a lot of police officers would want to, since they get tagged with the responsibility for dealing with the consequences of the failure of family and school. Mike in Crown Point, Indiana.
Morning, guys. I think you could triple the police force. Wouldn't have a least bit of impact. This is a direct, like your dispense to us, direct result of the welfare state. It supports it, encourages it, generates it. If all these unemployed people have no money, where do they get money to buy drugs? And the politicians are in on it. It goes to their favor. They want the votes. I don't know. I just throw your hands up. People act like they just throw money at things and they'll get better.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Mind-boggling.
Thanks for the call, Mike. Tom in Deer Park.
Oh, hi. Good morning. Among other things, yesterday, Bobby Rush and Senator Tammy Duckworth are putting together another bill, and I'm just glancing at it here. But among the things it would do would be restrict the availability of qualifying firearms to criminals, children, and other persons prohibited by federal law from receiving firearms. So in other words, they're going to pass a law to make it illegal for crooks to have guns. Thank you. Have a nice day.
And there's already laws on the book, and
yeah,
they don't follow
is that right?
the law.
Right.
I'm just worried about potential burnout for police officers and members of the gang task force and fugitive patrol.
Well,
and they said that this is what Johnson said because a reporter actually asked that question, so kudos to them. He said that we're going to closely monitor that with their supervisors. We have an obligation to make sure that they're fresh and ready for their tours of duty.
Well, you rotate people in and out. I suppose it's possible. The other responses, Tom mentioned, gun control, of course.
New laws, that'll work.
State Senator Maddie Hunter, she's one of your esteemed Chicago Democrat legislators. She wants the mayor of the city, the governor, and the president of the Cook County Board to sit down. If she needs to call each one of them personally, she will.
Oh.
That's how much she's willing to do to stop the violence. She's willing to make 3 phone calls to politicians to get Preckwinkle, Emanuel, and Ronner in the same room to have the same mindless conversation that the political ruling class in the city and state has been having for, I don't know, half century, certainly the last 30 years. Wow.
Fingers don't get tired.
She's so, I mean, that is really
brave.
Take charge. That's so impressive, Senator Maddie Hunter. Make sure you call her office if you're a Maddie Hunter constituent, even if you're not, and thank her. Thank her for her bravery. Thank her for her vision. Thank her for this commitment to the children. Thank her for being such an idea incubator. You 3 politicians get in a room and talk. I'll, drive you there. Wow. So impressive. Can you put up David O'Hare since my mouse isn't working? David O'Hare, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Dave, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Okay, great show as always.
Thank you.
And I got to tell you, I agree with you politically and culturally 99% of the time. And Rahm Emanuel, I disagree with most of the time. But when he said the spiritual component, I couldn't agree more with him. I don't know what spiritual component he would suggest, but let's not be sarcastic about that. Well, it is controversial because really it's talking about God.
I'm not being. Yeah, I'm not being.
This is an issue of eternity. People are getting killed; they're going to eternity. There's a spiritual component.
There's no question.
It is needed.
I'm not being sarcastic about the spiritual component, and particularly as it relates to character formation. I'm being sarcastic about the messenger, not the message.
Yes, sir. Well, I respect where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thanks for the call, Dave. But I'm glad you called so I could point out that distinction. The messenger is a fraud. And so for him to preen at the podium about the pulpit is insulting, and it should be taken as insulting. Neil in LaGrange.
Hi, good morning. 2 things. Chicago has some of the strictest gun laws, and look at where it's gotten us. Amy just said a little bit ago that the definition of a criminal is somebody that doesn't follow the law. So the only people that follow the law are the law-abiding citizens. And finally, nowadays they villainize the cops. They make the criminals victims, and they make it harder for law-abiding citizens to protect ourselves.
Yeah, that's a nice summary. Thanks for the call, Neil. Appreciate it. Richard in DeKalb.
Hey, Dan, when a family is having trouble, you sit down and you have a conversation with solutions is the goal. And I think WIND, WLS, WCPT, you all have such a voice in this. You can easily call a forum, bring in Father Flager, bring in Black Lives Matter, whoever their vocal person is, sit down with them in a forum, if they start to just babble along, turn off their mic, and you say, what is the solution? You need to give me a solution, because I don't believe that sarcasm and privatization and blaming the unions is just going to, it just perpetuates the anger from all these different sides. I think that you, yourself, Dan Proft, on your Dan Proft show, could literally have a forum saying, okay, Joe Smith, you are this, and here's the problem. You need to find a solution or you'll be unemployed. When you talk about CPS, you're going to start blaming people, finding responsibility, accountability, and then take these people to task. And if they can't do the job, you replace them. It isn't unions' fault. It isn't culture's fault. It's because we will not talk to each other and say, you and I need to find a solution, because I don't want to walk the streets of Chicago and be shot to death. No matter what color your skin is, nobody wants to be shot to death. And somebody's not doing something about this. And Dan Proft and the Dan Proft Show could literally do something about this to bring those voices together. Flagrant to me is a goofball. I mean, he can tout and do anything. All he does is say he's a politician. He needs to be a solution, and if not, replace him with somebody else from the Catholic Church who will do something to solve this problem. If I don't solve problems in my family, then my family falls apart. And sooner or later, as the father, I say, look, this is not going to be tolerated anymore. You're doing this. And then my children will say, but Dad, you're doing this. And we find solutions. But we don't do that by being sarcastic and jabbing each other. That does nothing but furthers the problems, Dan.
Well, okay. I appreciate the call and the idea, Richard. Thank you for that. And I don't disagree with you. I mean, I'd be happy to participate in any such forum. I'm happy for 560 to sponsor such forums, Chicago's Morning Answer, to bring people on and we can talk to them. And as we try to do, as we do, and we try to get more people that are willing to have the conversation. I think you have to highlight to people, though, when you have false prophets presenting themselves. You mentioned a couple of the names who I would put in that category. But here's a solution. I mean, you mentioned in your household, the father, as the father, I step in. Well, right. One of the issues is the lack of fathers in these households with respect to forming these young men. But the other thing is, it's not a government bureaucracy. I mean, I'm sure the pastors are all well-intended, and as I agree with you that nobody wants to be shot or see anybody else shot, unless you're, the shooter, I guess. But generally speaking, civilized people don't. So why don't we look to programs, institutions that are proving up? Why don't we scale models that we know work? They're all over the city. They get no profile, very little profile, because they're not headed by a politician. They're not camera-friendly. They could be faith-based, and it could be not. It could be not a person of color that's leading them, so it's not interesting. I'll give you one example. You want to understand how to do character formation with young men, boys to men, and I don't mean the boy band. Boys to men. Turning boys into men.
ABC.
Go talk to Glenn Wilkie at the Midtown Educational Foundation. Go, as I did a few weeks back, and see their summer day programs for men. They've got similar programs for girls, and they do it they recruit from all over the city, some of the toughest neighborhoods. The boys program is in Bucktown, so it's a long commute for a lot of kids from the south and west sides, but they come anyway. I mean, those are the ones with parents involved. And they take the same approach like Northridge Prep does in Niles with respect to family sits down, and we talk to the family in addition to the prospective student. Same thing with the Midtown Educational Foundation. And they've got coaches, and they do sports, and they do classroom work, and they break out in disciplines. And they have volunteers, some egghead from University of Chicago is teaching the kids physics, that sort of thing. And it's working.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it's working. But there's 500 kids in their day program. And we have how many? 350,000 kids in CPS schools? So rather than playing this game of where does the money go, like another $50 million here or there is going to fundamentally alter the course of the city and the course of the lives of the families who are most affected. It's not run through the same meat grinder that has been run through for 50 years. Why don't we talk about programs that have proven results over a long period of time, where the kids go on to college or work and come back, and then they participate in the program to pay it forward. There are schools that do it. There are private nonprofits that do it. The government doesn't do it. So as soon as people in power want to have that conversation, not about I've got all the solutions or you've got all the solutions, but here's something that is working. And if you want to invest in results, then look at what's working and scale it. So when that happens, then maybe we'll get somewhere. Until then, it's going to be listening to the mind-numbing pablum and propaganda from City Hall and from storefront pastors and from the idiot savants in our political class, and we're going to get nowhere, and more people will die. Let's say on more or less the same trajectory. And yes, in the short term, more cops, I would have done this long ago. I mean, putting 300, 400 more cops in the west and south sides, what is that? It's a mission of failure. Why didn't you do it before? The endemic violence on the south and west sides just came to the attention of Tiny Dancer and Eddie Johnson. Where have they been? First responsibility of government, provide for the physical security of your constituents. Tiny Dancer is a failure, and so is everybody else who's part of the Chicago power structure. Failure. Of course you should deploy more resources. And if that means resources are taken away from other neighborhoods, well, you do with what you can. Rank order priority. That's living in the adult world.
Well, why do he need 3 cop cars in front of his house and one behind his house?
He doesn't. Agreed.
And then if somebody's robbed that person who was armed robber who robbed our Domino's pizza delivery guy, they didn't pull any of those officers off of Rom's house to investigate a gunman, because then he struck again at Waveland and Marshfield an hour later.
Pull Burke's security detail, pull Tiny Dancer's security detail. He can drive himself. He's just a politician.
He doesn't need 3 black SUVs.
He's not a feudal lord.
It's ridiculous.
So maybe when we get
so rich, pay for your own security.
And so to that point, maybe when we have a city that stops genuflecting before this failed political class, lethal failure, generational failure, maybe we'll get somewhere. Lou in Chicago Heights.
I was recently at a function with union people on Sunday, and we were talking about this, the city. They can't get kids that can do simple math to read a ruler, to add and subtract, and to divide. Now, they have no problem bringing minorities in, but you have tests you have to pass, because if you're working with electricity or you're welding or, you're building a building, people's lives matter. And people can't pass a simple math test. And that's what's really sad.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Lou.
And that's really where the problem comes in. If you can't add, subtract, and read at a reasonable level, where are you going to function in the real world at? I've been dealing with kids for 20 years, 30 years, and it's sad to see what happens that, kids can't function in the real world.
Thanks, Lou.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.